Hey everyone, we are going to look at chapter 2, which is population, in this review today. Make sure that you are spending some time reviewing vocabulary. I might not be touching on everything. Vocabulary is more than half the battle here, so spend some time with a Quizlet or flashcards or anything you can do to make sure that you're getting terms down. One of the first important concepts from chapter 2 is the idea of density. Remember, there are three types of density. The first is arithmetic or crude density. They're the same thing. And that tells how close together people live. Density is a measurement of how close or far apart people are in a particular area. So to calculate the density of an area, you take the total population and you divide that by the square feet, the square miles, or the square kilometers of that area. And that will give you a rough estimate of how close together people are living. Physiological density is a little more specific. You still take the full population of the state or the country you're looking at, but this time you divide it by the arable land, which remember means the land that is suitable for farming. This will actually give you a better idea of how dense it is in places that people are actually living. Whereas arithmetic density looks at the entire area of a country, physiological density is going to give you a better idea of where people actually are living in the country. Your book talks about Egypt as an example. Egypt appears not to be very dense because most of it is desert and people aren't living there. But when you look at the physiological density of Egypt, it becomes much, much more dense. People are living pretty close together in the arable land. Then the last type of density was agricultural density, and that is the number of farmers divided by the arable land in a country. And this will tell you how much demand is put on the land to produce food. So places that have a high agricultural density, you're going to find more subsistence farming and more of people farming year-round, whereas in places that have a low agricultural density, you are going to find more commercial farming and fewer people engaged in farming as a whole. We went on to talk about population concentrations. These are the 5 areas in the world in which people are, or at least our 5 biggest concentrations or groups of population. The first is in East Asia or China, right over here. I don't know if you can actually see that. The second is South Asia or India, the Indian subcontinent. Now, your book groups those two together. I still like to think of Southeast Asia as its own region, so that's going to be down here and through Indonesia. Europe is your 4th most concentrated, particularly Western Europe, but as you can see, it kind of spills into Central and Eastern Europe too. And finally, the eastern half of North America, or where Megalopolis is located, is your 5th largest population concentration in the world. Overpopulation is an important topic from chapter 2. You do need to remember that overpopulation doesn't mean too many people, but rather that there are not enough resources in an area to support the population that's living there. That's when people are going to start going hungry or going without water or going without medical care. This is related to the idea of carrying capacity, and that is the maximum amount of people a particular area can support. This little picture over here illustrates that well. It's the Earth or globe carrying the population. If there are too many people in that area, that's going to put too much stress on the resources and they will deplete fast. Overpopulation as kind of an area of study was pioneered by Thomas Malthus, who, remember, believed that the food supply was growing linearly, like doubling every year, or not doubling every year, but adding like 1 more or 2 more units of food while the population was growing exponentially. And that's when you're getting into doubling every year. This creates all sorts of distribution problems. While most people today say Malthus was wrong about how severe the problem would get, people generally agree that we have a major resource distribution problem in the world that's making it hard for people to get food and other supplies they need to survive. Probably the most important concept from chapter 2 is that you're getting familiar with all the different demographics that geographers use to talk about population in the world. The total fertility rate is one of the most important ones. It tells you the average number of children women are going to have in their lifetime. For the United States, it's actually fairly low. It's like 1.9. While in places in sub-Saharan Africa, where the population is still growing very, very rapidly, still in stage 2, you're going to see TFRs closer to 6, 7, 8, and even 10. Crude birth rate is the number of live births in a country divided by the population. That's going to give you some indication of how fast the population is growing, while crude death rate is the number of deaths divided by the total population of a country, and that should give you some idea of how fast the population is declining. Most countries are going to see an increase in population. That is, there's going to be more births than deaths. This, of course, does not account for migration, but is calculated in the natural increase rate, or the NIR. To calculate the NIR, you take your crude birth rate, you subtract the crude death rate, and you divide by 10. That will tell you at what percent of a country's population is growing every year. Many countries are starting to reach ZPG, or zero population growth, where the crude birth rate and the crude death rate are roughly equal. Here is a great representation of the demographic transition model. I'm not going to spend a lot of time right now going through this, but I have included this as a handout on Canvas, so if you want to print it out and look at it closer, ask me questions in class or during Warrior Time, this tool is available for you on Canvas where this video is. Do pay attention to kind of what the birth rate, death rate, and the natural increase rate are doing at each stage. And for our purposes, stage 5, where we have declining population or a natural decrease, is a real stage. Remember, this is different than your biology class, where there are only 3 stages. In geography, there are 5. Population pyramids are another tool that geographers can use to examine what population trends are happening. We'll look at 4 population pyramids here. Just a couple definitions. Remember that a cohort is the group of males or females in a particular age group, so each bar on a population pyramid is a cohort. And then you have dependents. Think of dependents as people who don't work. Geographers put that as those between 0 and 14 years old and anyone over 65. You have the dependency ratio, which is your dependents divided by your independents, the people in the workforce, and that tells you how much stress is put on individual people working to help provide for the needs of dependents. We're not going to look at a population pyramid from stage 1 because no country is in stage 1 of the demographic transition model today. All countries are in at least stage 2. Furthermore, there's so much variability in a stage 1 population that its pyramid, there's not a predictive shape for it. Stage 2 of your demographic transition model is going to be represented by a population pyramid that actually looks like a pyramid. You see, starting at the bottom, reading up, fewer and fewer individuals in each cohort. This is representing a population that is growing fast, but like here with Niger, it's probably a population that's not getting access to great health care as well. A stage 3 population pyramid is going to start flattening out a little bit at the base. It's still going to be wider than the top. There's not going to be a lot of vertical. It's still pyramidal in shape, but you can see, especially towards the bottom cohorts again, that the population growth rate is starting to decline, but not the population. Once you get to stage 4, you will see more like average verticality. Things might look a little bit more square. You can also see with this one in Norway, in the 80+ cohort, something strange in that you have about twice as many females, or at least 1.5 times as many females as you do males. This is largely due to the effects of World War II, where men were going and fighting in war and dying. Population and health, specifically epidemiology, was an important concept from Chapter 2. There were a few more demographic measures that were mentioned. The most important of these is the infant mortality rate, or the IMR. This shows you how many babies die between birth and age 1 per 1,000 live births. If we look at this map down here, we can see that sub-Saharan Africa is where we're going to see some of our highest infant mortality rates. That contributes to why they have so many children, and also why it also indicates that the health care available to individuals is not as great as it is in places with lower IMRs. The child mortality rate is a similar measure, except it goes from age 1 to age 5. Most geographers are more interested in the infant mortality rate than the child mortality rate. And finally, you have life expectancy. Life expectancy is the number of years a person can expect to live at their birth. So assuming nothing else changes, if you were born today, your life expectancy is set. For in the United States right now, it's roughly between 69 and 72, depending on gender. Women live longer because men do silly things like, I don't know, go on shows like MTV's Jackass and jump off of things. Oh, wow, I'm stupid. You also learned about the epidemiologic transition. This is work that compares the types of diseases that we're going to find during each stage of the demographic transition. So in stage 1, geographers believe that most of the disease around was pestilence and famine. That's going to be like the Black Plague. Other things that are vector diseases, which we'll remember is something that requires a host to transmit the disease. It's not like the cold, which is a not vector disease you just can catch or not feel well, but rather vector diseases require there to be a host like a mosquito, another human, or a rat or a flea or something like that. In stage 2, we saw receding pandemics like cholera. So we would have diseases break out over a wide area, but they would quickly retract into themselves. We started figuring out, like if you remember Dr. Snow, how to catch a lot of the vectors for these and how to treat them better. Countries that are in stage 3 of the DTM are going to see more human-created and degenerative diseases. What that means is because of their lifestyle, that they're going to contract diseases. Cancer is a good example of this, especially like a smoker who gets lung cancer. Type 2 diabetes could be human created. That's someone who hasn't been necessarily taking care of their diet as well as they should, and they're going to see a drop in insulin production. Stage 4 is the same as stage 3, but these countries that are in stage 4 have typically found medical advancements that are going to help people live longer. And then stage 5, they're saying, is a return to infectious and parasitic diseases. So again, more vector diseases like HIV in sub-Saharan Africa and other places in the world. And then you have population policies. These are different policies or ways a government tries to pursue shaping their actual population. You could have an expansive population policy. That's goal is to increase the population growth in the country. A few examples of these. Russia, 9 months before their national holiday, has a day off of work. It's essentially baby making day, where people are encouraged to stay home with their spouses or significant others and do whatever it takes to create a child. They give fabulous prizes away on the national holiday for the first baby that is born, and that have in the past include things like cars and lifetime supplies of diapers and formula, anything to help encourage population growth. Do It for Denmark is a fun ad campaign that Denmark ran a couple of years ago, where they encouraged their citizens to go on a romantic vacation out of the country with the idea that a baby would be conceived on that vacation. Geographers actually did the work to realize that 45% of babies born in Denmark were actually conceived in another country. So the Do It for Denmark campaign was like encouraging people to get out of the country on a holiday with the idea that they would come back and have more babies. In the United States, we also have an expansive population policy, albeit not as fun as Russia or Denmark. That in the United States, we give tax credits for kids. When parents have a child, they can write them off on their taxes up to $8,000. I think it's something like that. And so there's a financial benefit in the United States to having children. A restrictive population policy seeks to decrease the growth of the population, and China's one-child policy is an example of that, and it's proven to actually be quite effective. The downside to that is we have certainly seen an increase in infanticide, the murdering of children, especially girls in China, because of kind of gender disparities and parents wanting a male child. Recently, the Chinese government has lifted a lot of the restrictions of the one-child policy and allowing most people to have 2 children now. And finally, there are eugenic population policies. These population policies seek to actively decrease the current population. No one likes eugenic population policies. You should think of genocides like in Rwanda or the Holocaust as an example of eugenic population policies, where the government is actually murdering or forcing members of the population to leave the country.